There are many, many, many groups, and there are three clusters that we pay attention to. One is this group of rebels that overthrew Assad, led by a group called the HTS. They have some Islamist background, some elements, not all, but some elements of these groups have a past, some years ago, connections with Al-Qaeda. Then you have the Kurds, which are, at least nominally, America's allies in the north. And then you have other groups that are backed by Jordan coming up from the south. And finally, you have Islamic State, which is constricted to a very small part of the country, but is still in existence. So you have this kind of checkerboard of different groups. Who controls how much of the country is still very much in flux? How much are they in competition amongst each other? How much are they likely to be in contestation is also up in the air. Now, they have different backers, as I said. The Kurds are, to a large extent, backed by the U.S. The HTS and some of the groups aligned with it have backing from countries like Turkey. Jordan is involved. So there are groups that are competing for influence in Syria, and then they have lots of different foreign backers who in turn are competing. And there are still some small remnants of Assad's army out there. We don't know how strong they are. Many of them have sort of melted into the night. There are literally videos of these soldiers taking off their uniforms and putting on civilian dress to melt away.
Well, let's talk about, Dana, what's going on inside the country, because the big fear here is about that power vacuum that could form. The latest reporting that we have is that the rebel group that toppled Assad's government has tasked Mohammed al-Bashir to form a transitional government. But put this into context. How fragile is this moment right now?
I think it's very fragile. And the risk, of course, is that right now there's exuberance across Syria by Syrians, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or sect, who are just so happy that the terrible regime of Bashar al-Assad is no more. But what we have in this group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who now controls Damascus, is definitely an offshoot of al-Qaeda, who's saying the right things now about wanting to govern for all Syrians, but really unclear whether it's going to separate from those Islamist roots and its former affiliation with Al-Qaeda. This is a group that's still designated as a terrorist organization by the United States. So there's some real issues right now. One is that there are still chemical weapons in Syria. We've seen Israel take a lot of those strikes only in the past 24 to 48 hours to eliminate that threat. Also, other kinds of weapons arsenals that the Assad regime had security over. And then we're seeing the Syrian Kurds mentioned earlier, who are a partner of U.S. military forces. There's still 900 U.S. military forces in Syria fighting ISIS. And now we have this possibility of ISIS, or of the Syrian Kurds and HTS, this group in the western part of Syria, fighting each other for control. A lot of movement on the ground.
When it comes to stability in the region, Dana, I don't mean to oversimplify this, but was the region more stable under Assad, or is it more stable, or could it be more stable in the future now that there's a power vacuum? And the term stable, I mean in the context of security for the U.S. and the West.
Sure. Well, I think it's really important to reflect on the history of Syria. Syria is where different U.S. security priorities intersect. If it's the U.S. focus on counterterrorism and making sure that terrorist groups cannot use Syria as a base from which to threaten and plan and launch and direct attacks against the United States, we have Al-Qaeda operating in Syria and we had ISIS operating in Syria, all while Bashar al-Assad was in power. If it's about our objectives of making sure that Iran is not a destabilizing force across the region, Iran was in Syrian territory for years, ensuring the survival of the Bashar al-Assad regime, but also using the airspace and the land of Syria to transit weapons from Iraq across Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon to attack Israel. So this is not really a stable situation under Bashar al-Assad, not to mention the drug trade and other things coming out of there. On the other hand, the idea of an Islamist offshoot governing Syria, potentially with extremist inclinations right on Israel's border, also not necessarily in the U.S. interest. So this is the first page of the first chapter of a really long story about what happens in Syria.